The conditions on Rikers Island have been described as a humanitarian crisis. 3 detainees have died this year. Violence and staff absences continue to plague the jail complex. CBS 2's Aundrea Cline-Thomas sat down for a wide-ranging interview with the new commissioner, Molina, and they talked about doing what his predecessors couldn't, turning things around.
So much has been written and talked about Rikers Island. Tell me about what that looked like for you, taking your own assessment, and did anything specifically stand out to you that you didn't know before?
Sure. So I think, for us in this administration, the assessment started, we did a pre-assessment of the facility by meeting with a lot of leadership that was there at the time, speaking to other officers and other stakeholders. And then once I was confirmed as commissioner for the department, continuing those conversations. And one of the things that struck me was really the department really needed to have a focus on organizational health and really, supporting its workforce and the staff to deal with not only the day-to-day challenges that every average person has, but really thinking about the strain of the challenge of being a correctional officer or a non-uniform person that works within our jail system in the city and supporting them with challenges that they have. And I think throughout the pandemic, we saw a lot of the impact of not having an organizational health strategy for the staff.
Talk about that strain on them. What did they tell you specifically?
So they're managing a very vulnerable populations. They're also managing the challenges of not only the impact that COVID had on them, but the impact that it had on their family members and other loved ones, while still having to come to a job where telecommuting wasn't going to be an option, right? And managing those in the population that are dealing with mental health issues, co-occurring addiction issues. So it's a challenging job under normal circumstances, and during the 2 years that we were under the height of different surges and peaks, really placed a strain on the system.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those strains too, and what happened as a result of having that strain. Let's talk about the violence and deaths on Rikers Island. Where does that stand right now? The federal monitor said that slashings and stabbings were still very much a problem. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so we do see our violence have continued to gone up, right? So violence has been increasing since 2020, and you see this real shift when there was a loss of a lot of things that I think were services provided to the incarcerated population. So in essence, from 2020 to all of 2021, there was virtually no external outside providers that were providing programming. Now, we do have program providers that work for the department, but it's a blended model because we think it's important for nonprofit providers to be able to engage with the population that's incarcerated. In addition to that, family visits were stopped and interrupted for long periods of time. That family engagement is important. Our court production, because court operations were also impacted by the pandemic. So what we experienced was longer lengths of stay of those that are incarcerated. Our lengths of stay are 4 times higher than LA County, which is the largest jail system in America. So those were a lot of the impact. Now, the system was already not working to efficiency, as has been laid out in the federal monitor's report. So since 2015, the department has been under a consent judgment, and year after year, there hasn't really been much progress. So these are long systemic failures that we inherited coming into this administration.
Yeah, a lot. And I want to read something that the federal monitor said in its last report. It says the department is trapped in a state of persistent dysfunctionality. Even the first step to improve is undercut by the absence of elementary skill, suggesting that the basics, just the basics and how you operate a jail, the basics are just not being done. Is that what you found during your assessment?
Sure. So, many of the staff brought that to my attention when I was doing an assessment and meeting with different stakeholders, external and internal, and they echoed the same sentiments as the monitor. And it was glaringly obvious to me. Something as simple as search operations were not being conducted by the prior administration, and we've ramped that up to address issues like contraband weapons that are in the facility that provide individuals the opportunity to hurt others. So gang housing by gang affiliation, which we've stopped doing that, and we are rebalancing gang houses. So those elementary type of correctional practices were just not being done. In addition, capital infrastructure, there was no investment within our facilities. So, we're moving with the borough-based jail plan, and we're building new facilities in the boroughs. but the infrastructure on the island still needed to be upkeep, and that just was not happening.
What does that mean? The cleanliness issues that we saw?
I think it's cleanliness. I think it's cell doors. So, you know, we've been replacing the cell doors at like RNDC simply because they were not locking, right? And that not only put those in custody in danger, but I think it also put our officers in danger. Thinking of solutions to deal with windows in our facilities that were repeatedly broken by detainees and using those glass shards as weapons, thinking of solutions to deal with that. But also it's investment in the staff, right? So there was really never any real professional development and investment in the workforce. So our two critical things, whether it be capital infrastructure and our human capital, there was really no investment in those two things for a number of years.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about detainees calling me. I get calls sometimes and they're saying, I'm afraid for my life, or I'm afraid that I'm going to catch another charge because I feel like I have to defend myself. So the idea was I have to have some weapon on me just to defend myself, to be here behind bars. How are you concretely trying to address that?
Absolutely. So I think one is, like I said, the infrastructure issue, right? To make sure that we're doing search operations so that individuals don't have contraband weapons inside the facilities. We're making sure that there's accountability. There was really not any accountability to deal with deficiencies, whether they be minor deficiencies or major deficiencies in the department for a number of years. So really addressing it and holding people accountable is something that's important to me.
Accountability of the staff?
Yes, well, we have to have accountability for the staff when they make mistakes, and that doesn't always mean severe punishment. Sometimes that means training. Sometimes it means a conversation, but sometimes it means taking other disciplinary action in a due process to hold people accountable. We also have to have accountability for the people that are also in custody. So if they harm someone else, if they harm a member of staff, that cannot be tolerated. But I'm also a firm believer that violence is a learned behavior, and it's something that through treatment modalities and really from an evidence-based point of view, that we can help individuals unlearn to deal with conflict.
And Mayor Adams, when you were announced, was talking about accountability should also include punitive segregation. And so what are your thoughts about that solitary confinement?
Sure. So I'm not a supporter of solitary confinement, and the department really has not had solitary confinement in its traditional sense. But any jail or prison needs restrictive housing, right, to address individuals that commit violent acts either against staff or against other persons that are detained.
So what does that look like?
So it looks like, what it looks like is removing that individual from what is known as general population, bringing them to restrictive housing where they have limitations on other privileges that might be available in general population, but that they're getting the treatment interventions that they need to sort of unlearn their behavior and hopefully be welcoming to it. Some of that is clinical, some of it is social worker engagement, but to make sure that people are safe. How
do you address criticism that's saying what it's really going to be is solitary confinement with a different name?
So it's not that. I think, the Board of Corrections, which is also another critical partner with us, right, they're our oversight body, came out with rules last fall called the Risk Management Accountability System, which really provides us one of the most progressive restrictive housing models in the country. And I think that was the right way forward. Because like I said earlier, I think violence is a learned behavior. And when I was in Westchester County, we had a similar program called Resolve to Stop the Violence, which is also a program that started out in San Francisco. And we were able to manage individuals that were charged with very violent crimes, have significant out-of-cell time. But what was important was the interventions and engagement between our non-uniform staff as well as our uniform staff.
Okay. And I want to talk about the deaths. Any more insight on, there are 3 people who have died so far this year. Any more insight on the circumstances surrounding their deaths?
Sure. So they are still currently under investigation, and my condolences and heart goes out to the Youngblood family, the Diaz family, the Pagan family. I think any death while in custody not only impacts obviously the family members and the loved ones of that individual, but even our workforce. So it's currently under investigation, so I can't talk in detail about that. But I will tell you that we do have in general a lot of people that come into the justice system that have significant pre-existing health conditions. It's a vulnerable population. And what we find is many of those individuals really needed a public health solution and not a criminal justice solution. So I think as we evolve our criminal justice system in our country, this is not exclusively a New York City issue, I look forward to being the voice of helping evolve and reform our system so it's a more humane system.
And is that already happening right now?
Absolutely, I think it's happening. I think it's about how we train our officers to make sure that the workforce culture understands that we have to have a workforce culture and mindset of rehabilitation. We're creating a data management analysis and planning unit, right? For too long, our criminal justice system has managed using slogans and not science. So I want to make sure that not only day to day, but strategically moving forward, we're making decisions based on evidence-based decisions, right? And I want everybody within the organization to be a strategic thinker, correction officers all the way to my chiefs and my deputy commissioners and assistant commissioners.
Yeah, let's talk about staffing, because absenteeism, you always talk about how the people are really central to any changes that are going to be made on Rikers Island. And absenteeism has been a major issue. The federal monitor said 30% of the workforce was unavailable to work with the incarcerated population. Do you think that there have been abuses to the sick leave policy that have led to this widespread absenteeism?
Sure. So I think, people have to remember we were in a huge pandemic and we had an Omicron surge. I also think, and I agree with a lot of the federal monitor's assessment of the department. And that report, why it was released while I was commissioner under 3 months, it really reflects a point in time where there was a significant number of staff that was out. And a lot of that was COVID related. Other things were line of duty. So, it's a very physical, demanding job. So the percentage of our workforce that is out because of injuries sustained while they were working. So I think all of that in totality has to be taken into consideration. The majority of our workforce came to work, working with our correctional health service partners who were also there with us to sort of deal with these challenges. We kept the transmission of COVID down in our facilities, right? So our workforce really did a lot for this city during a very, very tough time in the city's history with the pandemic.
Understood it, but there were still unmanned stations. The people who did come to work because of the widespread absenteeism, it made their job 10 times harder and more dangerous. So how do you address people not being able to work with the incarcerated population or on extended sick leave when there's a crisis underway?
Sure. So what I'll say is, since I've been there, we've had over 1,300 officers come back, right? Part of that was engagement. Part of it was talking about an organizational health strategy to support staff to come back in any organization, whether you're running a Department of Corrections or you're working somewhere in a private sector. You have to show your employees that you care about their well-being for them to be vested in the mission of the organization. So I did a lot of those things. I listened to staff. I held conferences with the staff to engage with hundreds of the workforce, both uniform and non-uniform staff. Our numbers as far as posts, significant number of staff have come back. So what has that allowed us to do? We were allowed to shift 5 of our 8 facilities back to 8 hours of normal operations. Family visitation is now back open again. External programming providers have come back. We have credible messengers coming back. So I think all of those things are placing us in the right direction. We still have a lot of work to do. But our staff we're engaged with our staff because we want our staff to be strategically engaged with the population that's in our custody.
So you're trying to gain trust first before kind of trying to do more things?
Well, I think you have to build trust, right? I mean, these issues, as you pointed out, have been going on for almost a decade, right? And, corrections now today across the country, there's more public awareness, which I think is really, really good. These issues were not at the forefront for many, many years, and we are an over-incarcerated nation. And I think a lot of that has to do is because we looked at our criminal justice system, specifically corrections, through the lens of capitalism and not really through the lens of sort of social services and sort of public health. And we need to transition to that because the majority of these individuals that are justice involved are going to be reintegrated back into their communities.
And so you're talking about this more from a sense of a culture shift, right? So how do you have a culture shift when there has been not just a decade? I mean, Rikers has never been, it seems like it's ever been like operational in a way that's functional and rehabilitative to people. It seems like it does more harm than good for so many people that have been, you know, incarcerated there. So how do you have this whole culture shift? Because this idea of the borough-based jails was, yes, you can have new facilities, but if you have the old understanding and the old practices, it's not going to be better just placing it someplace else. So how do you implement a whole culture shift, especially when the federal monitors report and speaking about the work of the correction officers say that it lacks rudimentary and elementary skill?
So I think it's a couple of things. First, I would say this. I think law enforcement leaders define the culture of their workforce, right? So that's on me, right? And I have to lead and practice day to day in sort of the principles that I believe a criminal justice system should have in being humane and managing individuals with dignity. So I think that's the first step. A lot of it also is investment in staff and training, right? So individuals have to be trained in how to do their job, and that training has to be consistent and ongoing. So it's not just the academy, it's in-service training, it's teaching first-line supervisors how to be supervisors and mentoring all of those ranks all the way up to the chief of department, assistant commissioners, and deputy commissioners and other staff. The other thing I'll say is also about accountability, right? So we need a timely and meaningful process for discipline and accountability, right? So that was lacking as well in the department. So really it's a holistic approach to really the defining culture and really making sure that our policies and procedures are aligned with the best practices in corrections. And that's some of the things we're doing, because some barriers, I think in my conversations with even the federal monitor, are self-imposed, right? And we say, well, our policy dictates that we do this. Well, those policy responsibilities are the responsibility of the commissioner. So I've committed in my journey, you know, in doing this job, that I will use all of the power within my office as commissioner to make those changes not only happen, but make sure that they're sustainable.
And the COBA is saying that they need 2,500 to 3,000 more officers to backfill the vacancies. Do you think so? And if so, like, how do you justify bringing more people on when so many people are out and can't fully do their duties?
Sure. So, you know, corrections, especially when you have moving into a very progressive restrictive housing model, when you want to provide a lot of in-depth programming, correction officers are part of the delivery of those services, right? So they're very staff intensive. We are doing an assessment now to make sure that we have the right number of officers that we need for the number of posts that we actually need manned, in addition to understanding where do we have officers working that really might make sense to have a different non-uniform employee work, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's, so looking to civilianization of some positions, which traditionally may have been uniform driven, but really it's not in the best interest to have a uniform person do that from a business standpoint. So we're doing all that assessment right now, so that'll be forthcoming.
Yeah, and accountability, I want to touch back on that. What should it look like? Because that's the whole thing. The federal monitor is exacerbated, right? They say we put out report after report and say the same thing for years and years, and nothing is getting done. We're not moving the needle in substantial ways. So what should accountability look like, especially since you've said I can't punish my way, you know, to accountability?
So I think when we talk about formal discipline, I will tell you, since I've been there in under 3 months, I've closed out over 600 disciplinary investigations in varying levels of discipline, to loss of vacation days, to unfortunately sometimes termination or irrevocable resignation. But I think accountability starts with our first line supervisors and making sure that they're not only there to support individuals, but to correct actions that are not in the best practices, and making sure that individuals are safe. And sometimes that's verbal, sometimes that takes a more formalized form in written communication between the first line supervisor and the officer. But that's what that looks like, right? To get everybody's buy-in. And I think the absence of accountability over the last 6 or 8 years in the department has led to a normalization of disorder, which is unacceptable to the mayor, and it's unacceptable to me as commissioner. And I make that message clear not only to my senior executive uniform staff, but also when I'm touring in the facilities and speaking with officers and engaging with them. I have a mentoring management style. That's just how I manage and engage with individuals. And I think every moment can be an educational moment and a learning experience. And I want to see individuals grow professionally And being a correctional officer is a professional law enforcement job that means something, but it also means that we have to make sure that people are being held up to the standards and expectations that we lay out.
And the idea is that the unions, or at least it's been discussed in this way, do the unions stand in the way of that accountability because of the contract, like having unlimited sick leave and things of that nature?
Yeah. So I think it's easy to blame the union. I will tell you, union leadership are strategic partners in this work. They have a vested interest in any department that they have a workforce representative to be successful. And they also have a job to do, right? Due process, and they have to represent their workforce and their members, not only for the collective bargaining purposes, but to making sure that their members have the support that they need to have a good work-life balance. So I don't begrudge them that. I have had a lot of open conversations with the union and how we could strategically move better. And I view all of the union leadership, both our non-uniform and our uniform leadership, as really strategic partners in this work.
And let's talk about you. Why would you ever want to come and take on this problem?
Sure.
So many people have come and said, I'm going to transform Rikers Island, and have been unsuccessful, quite frankly. So why did you want to take on this challenge?
So I tell you, I'm a kid from the Bronx. I grew up in the Bronx, went to Christopher Columbus High School on Astor Avenue in the Bronx. And I had both my mom and dad in my life, so a lot of kids didn't have that when I was growing up. But despite having that, I have family members that were justice involved, spent years on Rikers and spent years of state and state prisons. I've also had loved ones and family members that have been the victims of very violent crimes. So I see both sides of it. I'm also a big believer in diversity and equity in positions, especially of law enforcement, of people that look like you and I. And as a person of color that grew up in the Bronx, when Mayor Adams saw that I had the capability to be able to take on this role, I had an obligation as a member of our community to say, you know what, I'm stepping in, and I'm going to use all of the talents that I've had an opportunity and people have invested in me to really transform. It's not about transforming Rikers Island. Rikers Island is a place, but it's really about transforming our criminal justice system so that it is dignified and humane throughout the system, not just at the point of incarceration, but really talking about what are alternatives to incarceration. What does diversion look like before someone actually has to be arrested? And the mayor always talks about how we have sort of these rivers of failure that feed the sea of violence. And I've seen that in my own communities, and my own family has been impacted by that. So families and communities cannot do this alone. Our communities have had persistent inequities, right, of access to whether it's quality education, healthcare, economic opportunities, and whether you're a kid in New York City in the Bronx or growing up somewhere in Memphis, your zip code determines your future. And under Mayor Adams' leadership, I think we're going to see a tremendous change in that for young people.
And so many people have had such great intentions. What about your plan, and what are you specifically going to do to make those intentions transform into actual action and progress?
Yeah, so I'm a very intention-oriented person. It's what got me to successfully help lead Westchester County Department of Corrections, which was also under federal oversight, and got them released from that. And even the then acting U.S. Attorney in the Southern District talked about how we transformed that department, right? So I'm an action-oriented, very intentional person, and I think people need guidance, right? And they need to be led to that. And our officers have a sort of the ability and resiliency to respond to that. And I tell you, in the first 3 months of my tenure now, I could see them responding, and they really want to be the tip of the spear of reform. You know, we're in a unique space in New York City where those that are incarcerated and those that work at the Department of Corrections, we all look like each other. We all come from the same zip codes. There's only 1 or 2 moments in our lives that really made a difference to where someone is a blue-collar worker raising a family and someone finds themselves incarcerated. Our staff is going to be the game changer in turning our criminal justice system around in this city.
Yeah. And what do people, I think that when we talk about people on Rikers, people don't recognize most of them are pretrial. They have not been convicted of a crime yet. But because they're on Rikers, they feel like they have absolutely no rights to anything. Like it's, I have people in my Twitter comments saying, well, just don't do anything and you won't be on Rikers. What should staff expect when they come to work, and what should the incarcerated population expect? What are both of their rights in that?
Yeah, so I think they both should expect to be supported, right? I think our staff need to be supported to do their job. I think that those that are incarcerated need to be supported not only in getting services to address a lot of their issues, but also we should not be a barrier to access to justice, and everything that we can do to make sure that those that are incarcerated and have lost their freedom, whether they're pretrial detainee or sentenced, need to make sure that they have the support that they need so that they don't become justice involved again. So it's also thinking about what does recidivism look like for that population, and recognizing, a lot of individuals that are there are not there of their own making, right? There's been a lot of failure to go around.
And I know that Mayor Adams often talks about Rikers. Even this morning, he was talking about Rikers has been a problem for a very long time. We discussed that. But you all are on the clock right now. So what does success look like in the short term, and how do you measure it long term?
Sure. So I think in the short term, we have seen some good trends, right? So I would say that assaults on our uniform staff are down calendar year to date 20%. Assaults on our non-uniform staff are down 40% calendar year to date. Calendar year to date, our use of force is down 26%. We still have a long way to go, but I think we want to trend in that direction. Strategically, long term, what it looks like for me is really sustainable reform that's embedded in an ethos of our workforce around rehabilitation. That's what it looks like for me, and we are going to get there, and I know that the staff is committed to that.
My last question for you is, with it being a very urgent situation still, what keeps you up at night?
Well, I tell you, I'm a man of faith. I grew up Catholic, and I pray every night for the people that are in our custodial care. I pray for their families that are also experiencing incarceration, and I pray for our workforce, right, to have the strength that they need to get through a night. And not every night is a tough night, but there are moments that I think a lot of the staff de-escalate, and that doesn't get talked about, right? So, I pray that God continue to give me the strength to be able to do this job, and that my workforce is supported by me. So that's what I think about at night.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. We hope to stay in touch
of course.
And just watch what you do.
No, thank you for the opportunity to come on.
Absolutely.
Rikers Island is slated to close by 2027 in favor of borough-based jails. The fear is if a major overhaul isn't enacted, the same problems will just transfer to the new locations.